Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back again with DC's Dark Crisis, except now that we're done with Justice League Frontier, now we're focusing on Justice League Incarnate. This is the multiversal Justice League team, and so this is actually going to connect the dots between what we saw in the last story that we covered and what goes on in the future of the Dark Crisis event. And so what this does here is this initially picks up on Earth 8. Now, Earth 8 is a world that we don't really know a whole lot about. We don't know much about that universe, but we do know it's the universe that Machine Head had come from. Remembering that Machine Head was part of Justice Incarnate. He was part of the Multiversal Justice League team. That remembering that Machine Head was one of a multitude of people out there who was, one, part of the Justice League Incarnate, but two, and more significantly as far as these other people were concerned, had actually joined the cause of Darkseid. The idea of Darkseid being that he could basically create a crack in the multiverse using Barry Allen and then harness the power of the Great Darkness and use it to recreate the multiverse in his own image, and that those individuals who allied themselves with Darkseid would basically be in a position to where their universes would be safe. Now, of course, they don't truly know Darkseid, and they're kind of fools for believing that would be the case. But the thing about this is that on Earth 8, we end up getting met by the arrival of Dr. Multiverse, who's a new character being introduced here. And in fact, Dr. Multiverse is a person that is totally mistrusted by her team, right? By the Retaliators. Now, she was part of the team at one point, but was actually kicked off. Now, this is one of those things where we can kind of read between the cracks here in terms of what's going on, no pun intended, but what's going on with her character, that the way that the power of Dr. Multiverse works is that Dr. Multiverse has what is essentially cosmic awareness, but it's cosmic awareness in terms of how she sees things. So she basically sees herself in the greater multiverse and where she resides. So she can literally look at a person and see every version of themselves across the multiverse. And we'll actually see how that manifests here in a little while. The kicker about all this is that because she's so powerful and because she represents such a much larger landscape in relation to everything else, that ultimately people hate her because she reminds them of just how small they really are. That in truth, their lives don't really amount to anything in relation to the existence of the greater multiverse itself. And as a result of that, she was actually kicked off of her own superhero team. But as we saw at the end of the last video, that basically Machine Head had essentially been destroyed by Darkseid, but Dr. Multiverse had found his head just kind of floating out there in the multiverse, bouncing between universes. And what this meant is that when she discovered it, she realized there's something going on out there in the greater multiverse, that the multiverse is essentially broken. Now, we don't know how much of this she's aware of in relation to everything, because even we don't necessarily know everything that's going on. We'll find out the greater things that are going on here, but in the midst of everything that's happening, suddenly the forces of the Retaliators are attacked by Tartarus. Now, Tartarus is really interesting here because he's going to turn out to be DC's version of Thanos, but what we end up doing is switching over to Earth Zero in Beijing, and we actually pick up with Avery, who's basically the Flash of China. Now, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with her, we're not going to go into a full in-depth character explanation here about her, but Avery is basically one of the individuals who is an aftermath of the original Flash story that was done during Rebirth, where basically you had the Flash Storm, right? The Speed Force Storm that granted the Speed Force to a whole bunch of different people, one of whom was like Godspeed and so on and so forth. That when it comes to Avery, she was a girl who gained the abilities of the Flash, albeit not necessarily on the same level of power as Barry Allen, and that she operates as the Flash in China. And so as she's here and facing off against Replicant, who basically has the intention of destabilizing the banks of China and then forcing the world to rely on cryptocurrency, and that Luxcoin will go to the moon, that what it does is, of course, leads her to kind of stepping in and intervening and so on and so forth. But in the midst of all this, what you have is Thomas Wayne from the Flashpoint universe, and you've got President Superman, both of whom are part of Justice Incarnate, who are watching this girl in action. And once she's done, they actually jump in and they effectively tell her, we need your speedster powers. And it's really kind of a cool explanation that's given here, because one of the things that happens is where she's a little uncertain about what's going on, they open a boom tube and she's like, is that a boom tube? I'm 100% in, and then just leaps in and just jumps in. But once everything kind of clears and she gets back to a state of normalcy, you get this cool explanation. And it's a really great way for Joshua Williamson to basically tell us, hey, so like, here's everything that's going on in case you missed it, which I think is a great little telltale here. And what this means is that for the most part, we're kind of given a refresher over Justice League Frontier. But for those of you guys who are still a little murky, even after the ending of that story, all they really know, and really the way it's explained explained here is it said the multiverse has a problem, which means Justice League Incarnate has a problem, that Darkseid, the god of everything evil, manipulated Barry Allen to crack the multiverse itself so that he could steal whatever power was on the other side and basically end everything as they know it. But Barry's speed forced him to be trapped on the other side, which now we know is Multiverse 2. It's the multiverse that existed before the original Crisis on Infinite Earths event, that where we originally thought that multiverse was destroyed, that in fact it wasn't. That multiverse is still very much there. And so what they need is Avery to be able to tap into the Speed Force to use her powers to rescue Barry Allen and then close the crack in the multiverse, thereby preventing Darkseid from being able to access what's on the other side or prevent whatever's on the other side from entering into Multiverse 1, right? Entering into their multiverse. And so that's one of the things to know here. Everybody here, none of them know that there's Multiverse 2 on the other side. None of them are aware of that. All they know is that there's just a source of energy on the other side that Darkseid was trying to get his hands on, and because it's Darkseid, this is a bad thing. So they just need to close the crack, and that's it. They have no clue what's there. And so what they've done is they've basically developed what's called the quantum treadmill, which basically would allow Avery to use her Speed Force powers to essentially allow Justice Incarnate to travel to the other side of into Multiverse 2 and then grab Barry and bring him back. The issue with this is that Avery doesn't really believe that she can pull this off, and in fact she doesn't even really know why she's here. And the reality of this is that Barry Allen had appointed Avery as one, the Flash, and two, Avery was going to be his replacement should anything happen, right? Should anything happen to him, that she's the one that's going to take his place, and by extension the Justice League Incarnate see her as the replacement Barry Allen. Now it's not really Joshua Williamson saying like she's better than Wally West or anything like that, right? Like hardcore fans will take that as it meaning that. That's not what it means. Before you freak out, they have their own stories going on and their own sets of events. Honestly, she's playing this role because in truth there really isn't anybody else. But of course, using the treadmill for the first time and not knowing exactly what it is she's doing, she transports them all to Earth 8. When they get there, they end up finding Earth 8 is already in a state of shambles. The Tartarus has already attacked New York. He's already just obliterated most of the retaliators. And in fact, those individuals who remain are not at all happy in seeing the Justice League Incarnate. Because remember, one of the big talking points that was revealed to us during the Justice League Frontier storyline is that what you have is you have all these events that happen on a multiversal level. The original Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Infinite Crisis event, Final Crisis, 0 Hour Crisis in Time, the Flashpoint event, New 52, all that kind of stuff, right? Dr. Manhattan, that there have always been these massive crisis events that affect the entire multiverse, and that the stories that we've seen have focused on how the Earth Zero heroes have been able to like overcome this threat and save the day. But we never really got to see the other side of the equation, which is the planets that are caught in collateral damage, the alternate universes that are caught in collateral damage with regards to this whole conflict. And that's how you ended up with groups like the Retaliators, people on other Earths who are aware of the multiverse. They know more about the multiverse than any of the superheroes on Earth Zero do, but they hate Earth Zero and they don't want to be a part of the multiverse. They would remove themselves from it if they could, because every single time there's some kind of a multiversal collapse or multiversal event, they get caught in the crossfire. And so that's why they're not happy to see these guys. And so in fact, when the Justice League Incarnate is here, that one of the things that's revealed is that the Retaliators knew exactly what Machine Head had done, that they were talking about how they were aware of who Psycho Pirate was. And in fact, the entire group of superheroes here basically voted, and that Machine Head was their emissary essentially, but they were all on board with working with Darkseid to basically allow Darkseid to achieve his goal and to protect their universe in the multiverse, which astonishes the entirety of Justice League Incarnate, right? They're like, we all knew, we voted to take the deal. Our world has been attacked by the multiverses too many times. And so ultimately Psycho Pirate was being controlled by Darkseid and that they were being lied to, but they didn't care, because in the end, the ends justified the means. Before they can continue any further, Tartarus makes his move and starts attacking everybody yet again, and then bringing all of his forces to bear. Now, of course, the crack as it exists here, it's one of those things where it's a little ambiguous. The crack is presented to us as being as much of a physical object as it is something that's happening. And the reason why I say this is because there's a point when Tartarus is talking to everybody there and basically in saying that like they're a lost cause here. There's no way they can overcome them, yada yada yada. You have no hope of defeating me. And then Darkseid emerges and said hope is not required, only Darkseid. And so what he says is he literally tells him like, give me your piece of the crack. And that's one of the things that's a little strange here is Joshua Williamson doesn't do the best job explaining exactly how this works. Is the crack part and parcel to Tartarus, right? is the thing that's basically that he kind of harbors a portion of its energy, and by stripping that energy away from Tartarus, what it does is it allows Darkseid to get closer to being able to open the crack on his own. Is the crack a physical object that Tartarus carries around? That Williamson and even just DC as a whole doesn't do a good job of explaining that, and they never do. They're never good at explaining that. It's always one of those things where they treat it as a kind of physical slash metatextual thing. It's one of the most frustrating things about when DC creates crisis events. The metatextual stuff, with the way that everything is written on this broad scale level, honestly, it can make it a pain in the ass. But the thing about this, and really what happens here, is you basically end up finding out that somewhere along the line, before all the different iterations of Darkseid across like the various universes, before they had all merged into like true form Darkseid, as we like to call him at the moment, before that had happened, that there was a point when you ended up having Tartarus, who had made a deal with one of the versions of Darkseid, and that version of Darkseid would leave Tartarus alone. He would allow him to just kind of conquer his own universe and call it a day. It was a you stay away, I stay away kind of thing. But now that all the different forms of Darkseid are consolidated into one being, the response to Darkseid is, I recognize no such treaty, right? Give me your portion of the crack of the crack in the multiverse, or like I'm just going to annihilate you and we're going to call it a day, right? Like that kind of a thing. What this does is it leads to a fight breaking out between the two of them, but this also gives us a few more indications of the nature of Dr. Multiverse's power when she looks at Darkseid and realizes that Darkseid is quite literally the only version of himself across the multiverse. There are no universe versions of Darkseid. That's it. He's unto himself in the same way that Dr. Multiverse is. There's only one of her. So in a lot of ways, she's kind of a stand-in for Captain Universe in Marvel Comics if Captain Universe operated on a multiversal level, which Captain Universe technically doesn't do. There's a Captain Universe in every single universe, but she's kind of that sort of character. The other reason why Tartarus is being viewed here is like DC's version of Thanos is because, much like Thanos harnessing the power of the Infinity Stones, which grant limitless energy, that what ended up happening here is along the lines, Tartarus had harnessed the entirety of the emotional spectrum and is literally using all the lantern rings unto himself. So it's kind of treated as Infinity Stones to a degree, right? In the sense that like they harness different aspects of the universe, because it's not one of those things where he's harnessing like hope and love and so on and so forth. The rings of the ancient spectrum here are sources of energy. They're sources of power, as opposed to simply just tapping into the emotional spectrum and calling it a day. And so while these guys basically break down into an actual fight between each other, literally Tartarus trying to destroy Darkseid so we can continue his quest to conquer his universe and in fact spread his influence out into the multiverse, Darkseid trying to stop him from doing that so he can basically conquer the multiverse, the way you end up having is the Justice League Incarnate that actually tries to find a way to take this portion of the crack that Darkseid has, because they can't keep it from him themselves, that if they take it to their base of operations, Darkseid will find them and take it back. The only real way to seemingly keep it safe is to get it lost in the multiverse somewhere to where Darkseid simply won't be able to find it, or to put it somewhere he can't get it across the multiverse, that before they can do that, that the crack actually takes off into the multiverse itself, that it literally just kind of disappears. Now, Dr. Multiverse, for her part, ends up creating a portal using the energy of Avery of the Flash to basically create rifts in the dimensional barriers between universes. She literally creates a portal and then tells them, you have to go out and you have to find that crack and you have to do something with it. But what this does is it basically turns the story essentially into a cat and mouse game, that in their efforts to find this crack and find out what's behind all of this, that what it's actually going to do is just kind of send them jumping into different alternate realities in these various stories, and in fact give us different depictions of characters across the multiverse. So what this is, in a lot of ways, for those of you guys coming from Marvel Comics, in a lot of ways what this is a blend between what Jonathan Hickman did with Avengers and New Avengers going into Secret Wars and a traditional crisis event from DC Comics. It's pretty genius. It's a very smart move, and it's a great way to blend these two things that we would normally see as being separate and bring them together and make them similar. And so what this does is it leads to Dr. Multiverse grabbing Avery, who doesn't really see herself as being ready for any of this, right? She offers a kind of personal speech where she's like, well, you know, I had great power thrust upon me at one point too, and that kind of a thing, which is cool because it creates a bit of a bond between the two, but I don't think anybody really cares about some impassioned speech made between two characters who are like, you gotta learn to trust yourself, bro. Like, so what they end up doing is they basically jump into the multiverse and they end up disappearing from the purview of the rest of the Justice Incarnate, because because they don't know where they're going. They have no clue where it is that they're heading to. Now, of course, we'll end up following their story later, but in the midst of all this, the entirety of Justice Incarnate is met by the arrival of Orion. Now, of course, Orion is the actual son of Darkseid, but is trying to work to destroy Darkseid, and that's usually how that works. What Joshua Williamson doing here is he's really kind of pulling the traditional strings of a multiversal event, right? Things that we're the most familiar with, that Darkseid has a son named Orion who lives on New Genesis with Highfather, and Highfather has a son named Scott Free who lives on Apocalypse with Darkseid. Like, it was a kind of switching of the sons to broker a truce because neither wanted to see their son destroyed, and that Orion usually works to try to defeat Darkseid because he was raised to believe that Darkseid was evil, that kind of a thing. And so him being here is quite literally, I'm the only one here that can defeat Darkseid, and the only way to really make this work, right? The only way to save the multiverse is to make it bleed, is to essentially try to destroy it and then kill Darkseid in that way, because Darkseid exists across the multiverse. Eradicating the multiverse means eradicating him, so basically doing it but by a different means or for a different purpose. That kind of seems to be the case, but the forces of Darkseid, with all these parademons led by Calabac, led by his, I guess, kind of other son, this leads to them invading Justice Incarnate. So obviously, looking at this first issue, it's going to have like some cool moments of the story, and it's going to have some moments we don't care about. I imagine that the whole instance of like following the entirety of Justice Incarnate and literally their story across the multiverse, that's probably the more interesting part. I don't know if you guys really care about the headquarters being attacked by the forces of Darkseid. I don't know if that really matters to you, but thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all next week where we continue on our journey to watch the Darkseid get destroyed and DC launch yet another crisis to fix the last crisis they just launched, which was designed to fix all the other crisis events they had before. It's the nature of DC Comics. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.